Welcome to a new episode of Measurement Mashup, the podcast on data-driven decisions in communication. Here we are talking about everything that has to do with measuring the effectiveness of communications, from public relations over campaigning to employee communications. This podcast is for everyone working in corporate communications and everybody interested in learning more about how communications can and should be measured. How measurement helps to increase the position of a communications department in the eyes of top management. My name is Steffen Rufenach, and virtually with me is Marc-Steffen Buchele.
Okay, hi, hello, I'm Marc-Steffen Buchele, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you here today and spending the next few minutes with you, not alone, of course, but together with Steffen and our guest today, Jesper Andersen from Denmark. Hello.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me on this program.
Great. Well, Jesper Andersen is with us today, as you heard, and he is the founder of Measurement Days, located in Denmark, a conference to showcase outstanding examples of how communication had demonstrated a measurable impact on the strategic business or organizational objectives. And his mission is to make measurement and evaluation as easily accessible and understandable as possible. Who does that remind me of? But above all, he's also involved with AMAC, the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communication. And he initiated an ebook capturing best practices from around the world. And that's what we want to talk about together today. What are great examples of measurement from the last few years? What can we learn from them? And how have the companies that have developed and used it, how have they benefited? So today we are talking about best cases. Jesper, a very, very warm welcome. Thank you for your time and the upcoming insights.
Thank you for inviting me.
Jesper, as Mark already said, you are very active in AMAC, the Association for Measuring and Evaluation of Communications. Can you tell us a bit more about what it does and how companies can get involved there?
Yes, thank you. Well, AMAC is an acronym. It stands for the Association for Measurement and Evaluation in Communication. I only joined them in 2014, but they have been around for more than a decade. And it's basically a global trade organization for all the kinds of companies and consultancies that work with measurement and evaluation. So I think originally it was very much companies that did sort of media monitoring and media analysis, but nowadays it's also, for instance, PR companies, non-profit companies, in-house communication teams, anyone who's really interested in exploring and using measurement and evaluation to demonstrate outcomes and impact. So the trade organization organizes summits, it organizes learning events. Right now there's a month-long measurement month, they call it, going on, which is sort of an educational initiative where they put on free webinars, free meetings, seminars and things like that, just to simply broaden what communication measurement and evaluation is all about.
Mm-hmm. And before we go into the cases that you've brought with you, from your work with AMAC, can you say a few words? What's the status of measurement overall? How good of a work did the association in the past, and how challenging is it still to, promote the concept of measurement in the PR industry?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a very, very big question. I would recommend for anyone listening to go to amacorg.com, which is the website, because the association actually puts out a lot of free materials like a case study bank and lots of different tools and educational videos. So even if you're not a member, there's a great deal of best practice that you can learn from visiting their website. In terms of how far along are we worldwide, I think that's a very, very difficult question to answer, because we're not only seeing that some markets are more developed than others. The UK and the United States are generally further along than the rest of us, but we're also seeing in the individual markets, like for instance, I operate a lot in the Nordic countries. We see everything from companies that do really world-class measurement to companies that are not doing any measurement at all. I should say companies and organizations. So there is sort of like a tiered difference between what companies are doing and why they're doing it. It's simply, it was called a journey of maturity. I think one speaker called it at the AMAC summit in 2016, and that's exactly what it is. So people are on different stages of the journey of measurement maturity.
Yeah, it's the same in Germany too. So we will develop all these kinds of measurement for different companies. And I think that's important to see it as an evolution process.
Exactly.
To get the companies on different stages of maturity. Sometimes they have resources, sometimes they have not, sometimes they have good objectives, sometimes they have not. So it's always different, and it's always company specific to develop a good measurement stuff.
One of my key phrases I always use when I do like master classes and workshops is that I say, start small, but start now. It's more important to start now than it is to prepare yourself for years and years and years before you finally get to the point where you say, okay, now we can start doing measurement. It's much better to start small, but start now and then build on that learning experience.
The last episodes that we distributed are exactly on this topic. We had some really, really cool cases of pilot projects with the Arbeitsagentur in Germany and with Wacker. They did a very good CSR project and they measured it very, very well. So that's the point, just to start and to give some insights and to develop the projects a little bit further and see it as an evolutionary process.
Yes, and I think one thing, and we discussed it before the episode, and we will discuss it later in this episode, of course, that hinders the PR industry a little bit are assumptions that we're taking about, how things are working and what impact things will be having. And we're going to talk about this a little later because you have an interesting opinion about this, Jesper. But let's look at the best practice cases maybe first. We are eager to learn about what is best practice right now and try to find out what companies can learn from this. However, as we want to keep this episode short, there's only two cases that we can look at this time. So we brought one from internal communication, and that is Maersk, and one from external communication, that's the Danish Heart Foundation. Would you please tell us a few words about these cases, how you selected them, what challenges these companies had, and what did you find most impressive? Maybe let's start with the Danish Heart Foundation.
Yes. Okay. So just briefly to be clear, the Measurement Day conference that I put on has a single purpose, and that is to showcase best practice. So simply make it a learning experience for all the people out there who think that they can't do measurement or don't understand how they can do measurement. It's simply showing them how other companies and corporations have done it. So that's what the Measurement Day conference is aiming to do. And this year we had the Danish Heart Foundation, who were skilled enough to win an AMAC award for the communication campaign that they were also presenting at my Measurement Day campaign. It was called Give Life, I think you would translate it to in English, or Grant Life. Basically, the Danish Heart Foundation is a foundation that fights to prevent people having strokes, having heart attacks, and to help people lead a better life if they've suffered from a stroke. But one of their main goals is to prevent people from getting strokes in the first place. So through education about health, about exercise, about good eating, and so on. But they also recognize that sometimes bad things happen and people actually get a stroke. And one of the most important things then when people do get a stroke is that there's somebody nearby who can then step in and give you resuscitation, give you, a heart massage. So the Give Life campaign was meant to get 30,000 people to sign up for a resuscitation course, learning how to do this sort of first aid when people have a stroke. And that was the basic goal of the campaign. And what I love about this case is that they worked backwards from what the end goal was. And that's when we're talking about best practices, that's one of the things I really love about it, because most people, unfortunately, start looking at the channels and they say, oh, what can we do with these channels? And then they sort of end up communication activities at some point.
They had a clear objective on behavior that they focused on.
Right. So what you might call the organizational goal or the business goal was to have fewer people die from stroke. And the way to achieve this was to have more people in general being ready to give resuscitation when these things happen. And then the next objective in that train of thought becomes, okay, then we need to get people to sign up for these free courses. So they then developed a campaign promoting these free courses and promoting the opportunities to sign up. And they didn't just get 30,000 people, they got 75,000 people to sign up over a period of, I think it was 6 to 12 months. And they've done all these different, very interesting kinds of measurement then, because they realized along the way when they were gathering data and talking to people that it wasn't just a matter of having the skill set, it was also a matter of having the courage, you might say, the self-confidence to know that you are actually capable of saving another person's life. People who have the skill set but don't have the courage won't act and start resuscitation. So they needed to give people confidence as well as skills. And that was something they learned along the way from measuring and monitoring the feedback that they got from participants in the program. They also learned some very interesting things, like people were having trouble identifying who was actually responsible for the courses. There are a number of different actors in the Danish sphere, you might say, in terms of health and heart disease. And so people were actually having trouble identifying that the course they had attended was actually put on by the Heart Foundation. So they got some insights from the campaign measurement about, okay, we need to put more emphasis on branding. We need to put, be a clearer sender of the message. But the most important thing was actually that they measured not only that people were attending the courses, but they then followed up with surveys, and they started asking people, how many of you have actually been in a situation where you had to use it? And they got a number of responses indicating that people had used it and had actually saved lives. So this is one campaign where you could actually see that this they could measure it all the way from the communication that was done to the lives that were saved through resuscitation at the end of it.
So
and I think that's
real impact then, right, Jesper? So they went beyond pure communication and direct behavior to what they actually wanted to achieve as an impact to save lives. Exactly. My question would be, Jesper, if I would look at another organization having this goal, right? So we want to organize workshops. They would probably have a goal, 30,000 people should attend. Then they would put some, PR campaign in place. Probably they would measure the clippings. So how many articles have been published? So they would know all this, but they would probably leave it at that, right? So that's what we usually see. And then sometimes you still get 75,000 people to attend these workshops because maybe people are interested. Maybe it wasn't your communication so much, but maybe it's just a good time to do this. And then you would celebrate and say, hey, we did a good job. So what did the Heart Foundation differently from your perspective to what a company would do that doesn't measure so much?
I think one of the main things was that, bear in mind that I wasn't working on this campaign. I've only heard it presented at the conference, so I don't have all the details. But as far as I understand, they put a lot of emphasis on trying to track where people first heard about the courses, like how did you hear about the opportunity to sign up for this course? They were doing surveys of samples of the target audience all the way through, talking to people like, where did you hear about it? What made you sign up? What were your motivation for signing up? And now that you have signed up, they ask people, what is your level of confidence before they went on the course? And then after they had attended the course, and they could see that people said that their level of confidence, their willingness to use the resuscitation skills increased dramatically from attending the course. So they were confirmed along the way that what they were actually doing did have an impact on the personal level of the attendees. So it's basically just survey, asking questions and making sure that if you have a hypothesis, that you then validate that hypothesis throughout the campaign.
Yeah. Do you know how they managed the data? You told that there are a lot of data, a lot of survey data, a lot of reach data, a lot of data out of these tools where you can manage the courses. How they get all these data shrinked and bind together? Do you know this?
They had help from, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention them, but they had help from several different agencies that helped them pool all the different data sources together. Agencies that are also AMAC members and agencies who are experts in combining, saying, okay, what's happening on social, what's happening in the news media, what are we seeing from the statistics on the website, what are we seeing from the surveys of people who have attended the resuscitation courses, and then they sort of pooled all that together and generated insights from that. I think that's a very important thing as well, that you don't just collect data and then have lots of pretty charts. You have to have someone who can actually look at the data and say, okay, what does this tell us? What can we then act on?
Yeah, the curating and the pooling of the data under this thinking is very important. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But what I like about this case, Jesper, you mentioned this in the beginning. They thought from like backwards, basically, right, from the impact that they wanted to achieve. And you mentioned this concept of confidence, right? To say, hey, are people confident enough to actually use it? When you think backwards, then confidence has a very important role, obviously, right? You might not have come up with the confidence element when you would have just thought in seminars, basically free seminars, right? So this would have enabled the Heart Foundation to say, hey, if confidence levels are still low after the seminars, then maybe we have done a good job to train people on what to do and how to do it. But we need to take other measures to increase confidence. And this is what I like about it, right? So it worked out well, obviously. They didn't have to do something, but if they would have had to do something, they would have had the data to know that something needs to be done, right?
Yes. And one of the things also that they learned from, they've kept in touch, so to speak, with all these 75,000 people who attended the courses. So they're asking them with regular intervals, or asking a sample of the target audience with regular intervals, how do you feel about your skill level now? How do you feel about your confidence level now? And then they can tell that over time, both skill and confidence is gradually dropping. So they also know that it doesn't just stop here with having 75,000 people going and attending the course. Someone will have to have a refresher course at some point if we want to keep the benefit of having all these people having resuscitation training. So they've learned so much, which is really, really fascinating. They've managed to get some really, really good insights about the behavior of the audience in general that they can build future campaigns on.
But did people correctly identify where they had heard about the initiative?
That was one of the interesting things, that people could tell why they wanted to attend the course and why they had signed up, with colleagues. It was this sort of thing where you had to sign up in groups and you could sign up as a whole group. So people were encouraged to maybe pick 4 or 5 colleagues at work and then go as a 6-man or 6-woman group and attend the course. So people could explain their motivation for attending the course, but there was confusion about who was actually responsible for doing the course. As I said, we have several different NGOs in Denmark that all work with heart disease and heart-related resuscitation matters. And some of them do TV advertising, which is part of the confusion. The Heart Foundation didn't do TV advertising, but when they asked people, how did you learn about this resuscitation course? Some people were actually saying, oh, I saw that in a TV commercial. And we know that to be not true because they didn't do any TV commercials. So there's definitely some brand confusion going on. But the most important thing, I think, is that people actually signed up and attended the course and learned from it.
And it's also good to know that these confusions are there, right? And that these factors play basically to your advantage.
I think that's a very important insight for them to manage in the future with their brand, with their positioning of the brand. I think that's an important insight in this point.
And also because this was sort of a secondary goal for the Heart Foundation, that they wanted to drive membership. So they wanted people to maybe also sign up as a permanent member of the association or the foundation. And because people didn't recognize that it was the Heart Foundation that had put on these courses, they didn't generate as much new membership flow as they had hoped. And that was partially explained by the brand confusion.
Yes, but one question, and maybe you already gave a point here that had to do with it. Why did the Heart Foundation invest in measurement so much? What were the drivers? Was it a personal thing that somebody at the organization found it to be important? Is it a legacy thing? Did they already do this for other campaigns and they thought, let's do this again? We had good experiences. So what was driving this? I mean, they took money into their hands to build this up, did workshops, developed this concept. So you need to have a driver for that. Yeah. What's your impression of this?
I think, and again, I wasn't working on the campaign, so I can't say this for sure, but my understanding of the case is that because the Heart Foundation is basically run on donations, they feel very accountable for the way that they spend their money. And so they needed not just to justify the spending, but they wanted to really learn for sure that, okay, are we actually doing the right thing? Are we spending our money the right way? What can we learn from this by actually measuring it properly? So I think it's a very healthy sign that an NGO like the Heart Foundation is so reflective of how they're spending their money.
Amazing.
And they are responsible for spending their money, how they do it.
Exactly.
That's the point.
This is a very good case, Jesper, and I think we can talk for hours about this because it's had so many interesting aspects. But shall we go to the next case? You brought another one on internal communications from Maersk.
Yes. This is from the Measurement Day conference in 2018 and was presented by the international shipping company Maersk, the shipping line. And what I really loved about this case is they set out to try and measure what effect, if any, employee advocacy can have for the company. So back in 2017, when they did the project, there was a lot of hype about employee advocacy. People were talking about it like this was the new thing, but nobody had really done any significant research to say, well, is this actually working, or is this, just a hype? And so because they're a global organization, they have tens of thousands of employees. They actually decided that they could do it themselves in-house, simply test it and see how it went. So the way that they presented the case was that they did sort of a call out to all their employees and said, we would like to experiment with this. Are there any volunteers amongst our employees? And they got 700 employees from all around the globe who said that they would like to volunteer to be in this sort of ambassador program or employee advocacy program. These 700 employees were then sort of hooked up with their social media profiles and so on to some kind of Maersk project database so that they could track it. And then for 6 months, they basically did a parallel tracking of what was going on in corporate communication and what did they sort of gain from that, and what was going on with the 700 employee advocates and what were they gaining from that. So this was a fairly output-oriented study because that was sort of like the place they started out. So they were looking at things like reach, they were looking at things like engagement, positive comments, negative comments, sharing, tone of voice, different keywords appearing in the coverage and so on. But they were basically doing what I think in advertising you might call it a split test, where you're testing two things in parallel to see which one works out best. And in this case, they were testing, what can we do with corporate communication? How far can we get with our corporate communication channels versus how far can we get, how positive coverage can we get if we're using these employee advocates?
It sounds like a lot of room and a lot of joy for experimentation in this company. And it's interesting, what are these people all about, that they have this room for experimenting? Do you know them?
Well, the company itself is one of the biggest brands in Denmark, and it's sort of like Lego. It's a company that most Danes are proud that Maersk is Danish, right? We see it as a pillar stone in the Danish corporate world because it's global and it's so big and so successful. But that also means that the people who work at Maersk have a very particular corporate culture. So they're very eager in general to defend their company and to help their company. They live and breathe Maersk, so the enthusiasm for, like, you don't just get 700 people to volunteer for something like this in any company, but you do in Maersk because people really want the company to be successful. So I think that they had a good starting off point in that regard, that people were really, really motivated to be part of it.
I'm thinking this is an amazing example how these experiments can also change the way communications work. Because I assume that when you have 700 ambassadors in your company and you have to talk to them first and use them as ambassadors, that the communication changes a lot. It's not the communications department anymore putting something on the internet or through a channel, but they have to produce something that's appealing to the ambassadors first and then see whether it's actually being shared by them, right? And this will probably affect the style of communication that a company has.
Yes.
What's your opinion about this, Jesper?
Well, I think, as again, bear in mind that this was an experiment done in 2017. And back then, as far as I understand the mask program, they simply put up a sort of a corporate policy saying, well, if you want to look for news that we encourage you to share, these are the different places you can go and look. But then we encourage you to, under these different corporate guidelines, please don't do this, please do that. They gave people a lot of room to be themselves and to carry the mask message themselves. And of course, that is a lot of labor for the individual. Like, it takes up time for the individual to come up with original posts and so on. And so since 2017, what I've seen in the employee advocacy sphere is a shift where people are trying to sort of automate that process. Like, for instance, pushing pre-made posts from the corporate communication department out to different employees and saying, well, we've done the work for you, just share this on your LinkedIn, right? And I think what I'm seeing right now is sort of a negative reaction to all this sort of corporate fluff that is being pushed out. It's being pushed out as employee advocacy, but it's really not advocacy at all, because it's not coming from the employees themselves. It's coming from corporate communication. They're simply just using the employees as an extension.
I think that's a little bit incredible and a little bit boring. And I think readers recognize this.
Yes.
This reminds me a little bit, Mark. You remember when we had a meeting at the Deutsche Telekom and how they structure internal comms. And if I look at internal communications, it's usually very hierarchical, right? So global comms has something to say, and then it triggers it to the country communicators and to functional communicators, and then they change it a little bit, adjust it to their markets or functions, and then they trickle it down. And then usually what somebody writes in a market, in a country, doesn't make it to the global level. And Deutsche Telekom has a system where basically everybody can write a post or put out some form of information. And then when something gets a lot of traction, a lot of likes and shares, then it will be lifted up even to the global level, right? So you as an employee in a tiny site in a market, you can actually write something that everybody will be able to see eventually if it is interesting enough. And I see this element here in Maersk, at least in 2017 probably as well, to have this kind of like a communication democracy, if you will. So
yes, yeah.
It's very faithful from the companies that they provide all these channels with a benefit of doubt to say, hey, just communicate. And I think it's also important for these war of talents that the companies are struggling with in the last years, that people decide to which company they come when they love the people that are working there. So it's all about people business. And I think that's the important part where communications should support a climate of a good company culture where they can communicate very, very openly, very honestly, very truthful. So I think that's the right way.
And what I love about the Maersk case is that they were willing to take a chance to learn something. I think that's a very, very important thing in all measurement and evaluation. When we look at best practice, you have to be willing to take some chances sometimes, and you have to be willing to accept that sometimes you might not get anything out of it at all. They had put aside time and budget and effort and said, well, this is something that we think will be a good investment. We think that we might learn something from this that will benefit us in the future, but we don't know for sure. When I look at what sets the truly great companies and organizations apart from the rest, it's the companies that have room to take risks, that allow the communication department to experiment and take risks and be a failure sometimes, not having to succeed all the time. The companies that only want, charts where the lines are going up month after month, they tend to get the kind of communication reports that basically just says, well, everything was a success. You sort of manipulate the data to make everything look like a success because you're afraid of failure.
This is a good bridge, Jesper, because we already said in the beginning that we would also talk about assumptions, right? Mm-hmm. We have the feeling that something could be working, and is there a way to test whether it really works or not? I thought from our conversation before the podcast, I thought that you have some interesting opinions about this. Can you please share what your experience with assumptions is in PR?
Yes, well, very briefly, I'm trying to be not too technical, but I'm writing a textbook at the moment, and I was doing some thinking about, how to organize my thoughts and my arguments. And all of a sudden I got this sort of epiphany that it dawned on me how much we actually rely on assumptions. Now, sometimes we call it experience and sometimes we call it gut feeling, but there is actually a lot of sort of silent assumptions going on behind what we actually do. And let me try and explain. Let's say, for instance, that we decide in a company that we'll be measuring the success of our PR campaign by how many media mentions we get, right? And so we're counting, the mentions in TV and radio and print and online. And then we deliver the numbers as sort of our success report. That is only a success because there is an underlying assumption that being mentioned in the media is a good thing. I mean, we've come to a point where some of these assumptions are so natural to us that we don't even think about them anymore. We don't recognize them as being assumptions, and so we don't question them anymore. So I see a lot of public relations people who go around on autopilot, simply going through the motion of creating media publicity, because there is this underlying assumption that if we're in the media, someone will see it. If they see it, they will, absorb the message. And if they absorb the message, then they will gradually form a better opinion of us. And that better opinion will some way down the line benefit us to some extent.
And the only thing the communicator should do is to post or to communicate in the media, and the job is done.
Exactly. That's my point exactly, where it becomes dangerous to us as the communication industry, not the measurement profession, but the communication industry, I think, is in danger of becoming irrelevant if we keep hanging on to these assumptions, because it's been sort of a defense mechanism, the way I see it, for generations in communication, that we say, oh, we can't measure communication, so we have to simply just, rely on these assumptions that it will work. But that's also been, I don't know what you would call it in English. In Danish, we would call it sort of a pillow that you rest on. That it becomes some sort of a comfy place where you can just rest and take it easy. So if you have these assumptions, so as long as I get my employer, my company, my client in the media, then my job is done. Then you're not taking responsibility for actually creating any sort of relevant outcome or business impact. You're simply just taking responsibility for pushing the story into the media. You're training a different skill set, and you're not really delivering anything of value.
And there's two aspects of this, Jesper, in what you're saying. One aspect is, yes, you need measurement to prove these assumptions to be either right or not right? And to learn from them, to learn from these measurements and say, hey, if my assumptions were wrong, what can I do to, really positively impact the business goals that I have? But on the other hand, you can also say, if I use measurement and can validate that my assumptions are true, then maybe I don't need to measure on a constant basis anymore, because I have sound proof that my assumptions are good. And then I can maybe step back and say, hey, this indicator is enough. It doesn't measure what I want to achieve, but since my assumptions, how this indicator will impact all the others that are really important to me, since these assumptions are true and have been measured to be true, then I can stop here. And the Danish Heart Foundation example is a good one to me, because you mentioned the confidence level there, right? And obviously they measured that people are confident to also use that information. So you could basically say, hey, obviously it's working. I don't need to measure confidence anymore that regularly, because I can already prove that the courses will have an impact on that one as well.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And of course, my point, I think, was that we don't necessarily need to validate the assumptions every single time, but we do need to regularly look ourselves in the mirror and say, well, what are actually the assumptions? Am I even thinking about what sort of assumptions my campaign is built on? What am I taking for granted? And how does that affect how the management level above me is going to see the reporting that I'm going to be doing? I think we're entering a new sort of phase in the communication industry where leaders, management, executives are questioning the results that we're delivering. So if we're only delivering, let's say, media publicity, like we generated so and so many impressions, they're going to say, so what? And if we can't argue that media impressions do have value, because there is sort of down the line there will come some sort of benefit from having positive media exposure, then we're in big trouble. So I would just caution anyone listening, take a step back and look at what sort of assumptions is your campaign based on, and should you be questioning those assumptions, because you may find that you're also using like the wrong channels or using your budget in a not optimal way.
I think that's an important point, because you always bring a little bit of your self-image, of your self-conception into communication work. If you believe you are a communication manager who is responsible for managing all the internal and external communication processes of companies or organizations, then you will have always in mind what's best communication for my stakeholders, my most relevant stakeholders. And sometimes you can give them communicative impulses via the media. That's the right way. If we have all these indicators in line to measure the impact of your communication. And you have also the case of the confidence level by Danish Heart Foundation. Okay, this is my main indicator in the past future or in the far future. And my short-term indicator is reach to get all these media in the topics that I prefer to communicate. So I think it's self-image and the feeling behind what I want to be as a communicator. What do you think, Steffen?
I love it. This is something that I would also say is a great outcome for our listeners here and something that you can take away, right? So question your assumptions, see how you can measure them maybe. And then when you measured them and you feel that, your assumptions are correct, then maybe you don't need to measure them all the time anymore. So I think that's a great learning. So thank you very much, Jesper, for this. Very interesting cases. Yeah. Very good takeaway in the end about the assumptions. Mark, we will put some material on the website, right? I hope.
Yes, all the links that Jesper mentioned will be put on the website on measurementmashup.com. But so much for today. I think it was a very interesting discussion about best cases and how to become a best case company, and with which self-images and with which assumptions you can get best in class by measurement, right? Is it possible to walk through all these AMAC best case databases and to develop a thing that's better? How would you deal with it?
Well, as we said in the beginning, it's a measurement of maturity, right? So there's always something new you can learn and always something you can be better at. I think what people should take heart in is that, every journey starts with the first step. A colleague says, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So there are all these different metaphors for just starting slowly, but starting now. And it's much better to take your first step on the measurement journey today and then learning from that. And don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to do everything at once or become an expert overnight. But have patience that there are a lot of good people out there to help you. And you can really, even from taking small steps, you can benefit greatly.
Okay, many thanks, Jesper, that you had this talk today with us on Measurement Mashup. Very, very helpful. Thanks for the insights. And I'm looking forward to our next episodes in the coming weeks here at Measurement Mashup, the podcast on data-driven decisions in communications. We hope you, as the listeners, you like the show and will join us again next time. Stay tuned.